Now, in the past, there was something of a peace movement, at least in theory, in Israel. For example, during the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 1982, after the Sabra and Shatila massacres, significant numbers took to the streets. That has, I'm afraid, not been the case this time. There are courageous Israelis, and I've done everything I can since this particular horror began on 7th of October to platform them on this channel. We'll continue to do so as we do today. They are courageous because they are so isolated in Israeli society, at least in the here and now, with disturbingly high levels of support for the onslaught against Gaza and beyond. But a really important new letter has been signed and published by around 3,000 Israelis so far and counting, which demands external pressure on Israel, including sanctions. Please do read the letter in full yourself. We have a link included in the video description, but it starts by saying, we Israeli citizens residing in Israel and abroad call on the international community, the UN and its institutions, the United States, the European Union, the League of Arab States, and all states around the world to intervene immediately and implement every possible sanction towards achieving an immediate ceasefire between Israel and its neighbours for the future of both peoples in Israel and Palestine, and the peoples of the region, and for their rights to security and life. It condemns what it calls the countless war crimes that Israel is committing and states that unfortunately the majority of Israelis support the continuation of the war and massacres, and a change from within is not currently feasible. Adding, Israel is on a suicide path and is sowing destruction and devastation each day. It states that Israel has abandoned the hostages, and do bear in mind the only significant release of Israeli hostages came last December because of a prisoner exchange deal, with the Israeli military killing more hostages than it has released by military means. The letter states Israel's Palestinian citizens, that is the 20% of Israel who are Palestinian, are persecuted and silenced by state authorities and by the wider public. With each day, says the letter, the prospect of a regional agreement and reconciliation where Jewish Israelis can live with security in this place gets eerily more distant. Sobering stuff. Indeed, it emphasises achieving these will require lengthy processes, but the constant massacres and destruction must be stopped immediately. But crucially, it decries the lack of true international pressure, not least the continuation of arms to Israel, as well as continued economic and security partnerships and scientific and cultural collaborations, leading, it says, Israelis to conclude these horrors have international support. They end the letter by saying, please, for our futures and the futures of all of the residents of Israel and the region, save us from ourselves, and use real pressure on Israel for an immediate ceasefire. Now, obviously, Israeli citizens calling for international sanctions against their state in the current climate, and given where public opinion is, in Israel that is, that's quite the move. But it's very courageous, it's important, and we can hear there the moral clarity in some of the best traditions, of course, of the Jewish left, which lives on, certainly in the United States, in Britain and elsewhere, but we can hear that tradition within Israel here in this letter. I'm really delighted to speak today to Anat Matar, who is an Israeli academic, who is one of the signatories. She's a veteran Israeli peace activist. She's a supporter of the BDS movement, that's boycott, divestment and sanctions. She's been involved in the Israeli Committee for Palestinian Prisoners, that is fighting for the rights of the countless Palestinians who've been incarcerated, as well as Academia for Justice. I started by asking her how this letter came about and why now.
Okay, this is something we've been thinking about for many, many months now, but the present one came about with my friend Yael Lehrer, who resides in France, and she saw a Twitter attack on someone, on another friend, who just suggested the idea of sanctions, and she drew a lot of fire. So Yael decided to write a draft of this letter, and she shared it with some friends. We edited a little bit together, and this is how we started just distributing it. And I think at the moment we have more than 2,900, almost 3,000 signatures. They are all Israeli citizens, and the vast majority of them are Jewish. And Palestinians, as you actually mentioned, are quite hesitating before they sign something like that, because the sanctions against them and the dangers that hovers around them is much, much, much greater than on us.
And we've seen arrests, haven't we? I've covered it on this channel, of Palestinian citizens of Israel for having spoken out. In terms of what the kind of asking for external pressure, I referred back to the fact that in the past you did get very substantial numbers involved in, for example, 1982. And that just hasn't.
You mentioned it. Can I correct a little bit?
Please do.
Okay, because it's indicative to this moment. Otherwise, I wouldn't have done so. But in 6th of June 1982, there was a small radical group which started protesting against the war the moment it started. And then it took the Zionist left a few days to realize, and even several weeks after, to realize that this is a wrong war. I mean, that this shouldn't have been happening. But this first kernel of the radical protest is the one we are having now. So actually, we are still waiting for that Zionist left to sometime, although we're over a year now, to sometime join us, to sometime understand that they should, instead of going to the war and serving in Netanyahu's army and in this onslaught, to just quit that, refuse to go and join the protest. And it hasn't really happened until now.
I mean, the call for external sanctions to be... Sorry, let me start again.
Yeah.
I mean, the call for sanctions to be imposed on Israel from without, I mean, is that itself a kind of sign that that within Israeli society, there isn't going to be the successful blocking, the stopping of what's happening? That is just impossible within the Israeli context, in the here and now, for that to happen. So therefore, it has to happen from those people in those states which arm and support Israel and facilitate what Israel is doing, without which Israel wouldn't be able to do what it's doing, that they have to put pressure on their governments, because it's not going to happen at the moment within Israel.
Yeah, I'm sad to say that I agree with this analysis. I'm not happy to give up on the Israeli society. As I just said, I mean, from the Zionist left, I'm still expecting for them to join us and to understand and to lay down their arms and not go, and rather than go to Gaza to fight, to join us in protest. But this doesn't really happen. I mean, or indeed it happens, but in very, very small numbers. So at the moment there are 130 refusers from the reserve service, and I think that's nice. I mean, it's not something that I would just wave off. I find it important, but still these are very, very small numbers. But the vast majority of the Israeli public is way behind, and we cannot really reach them. And I'm trying, and my friends, my comrades are trying as much as they can to convince, but we know that our words are falling on deaf ears. So we think something has to stop this onslaught. And this something is, I think, independently of the problems of the Israeli population, it is the responsibility of the international community. I mean, they're seeing these things happening.
It's interesting you mentioned refuseniks. I interviewed a very courageous young 18-year-old Israeli refusenik a few months ago, but as you say, very, very small numbers in the grand scheme of things. But that said, we should obviously commend even more the courage of those who refused, obviously, to follow those orders. It's striking, isn't it? The former head of the National Security Council of Israel a few days ago has publicly said that Israeli soldiers should refuse to follow the orders they have, on the grounds that the so-called general's plan is being implemented in northern Israel, which is to ethnically cleanse.
That's true.
What do you think about the significance of that, by the way? Just, I mean, in terms of how that feeds in, because
I don't have a lot of sympathy. I don't have a lot of sympathy to those generals who, after killing for so many years, so many Palestinians now wake up and realize. On the other hand, I think it's important, because if we do want to reach the Israeli population, that maybe contribute to that, because they probably listen much more to such a general or ex-general than to me, that I'm already marked for, and I haven't been so for many years. But I don't see even that this changes their view. This is what's amazing.
Well, on that, I guess this is what I think disturbs a lot of us, basically, when we look at if you look at the polling of Israeli society. Let's look at that. So if we take out the Palestinian population of Israel, which is about 20%, of the Jewish population, polling suggests that 60% consistently oppose all humanitarian aid getting into Gaza, which in practice means that everybody dying. And surely you would expect anyone who answers that question in the negative should understand that. And then a division between there's 2% who think the bombing has gone too far. I mean, this was a few months ago, but it was already apocalyptic. And then the rest were divided into two main camps. Those who said that the bombing was the right amount, and those who said it hadn't gone far enough. And there was almost a 50-50 split. I always look at that and think, what is actually, I mean, that comes across as genocidal mania, and which I think will be exact. I mean, again, it's when you see a post by an Israeli peace activist and they'll post about a horror, and then they'll be bombarded with responses by fellow Israeli citizens in Hebrew, and we click the translate tweet buttons, and it's some of the, it's like they're responding to pictures of children who've been blown apart.
I know.
And it was the most hideous. How would you understand what's happening? That kind of collective.
I suppose the horrors of the 7th of October do affect people, but it cannot explain this much of hostility or inhumanity, actually, because I think it's ingrained in those people's minds for many, many years. The idea of Jewish superiority, not treating Palestinians like real humans, and this is what enables them to see. I just read before we entered this interview, someone commemorating his brother who was killed in Lebanon a few days ago. And he's a settler, and he said about this brother, he said, oh, you went to Gaza to fight in Gaza, and you said this is going to be, we are going to onslaught every child and every woman, and now it's you who are dead. And this is what he said on his grave.
And I saw it. It's incredible. It's hideous.
Yeah. So there are things that I really don't know how to explain.
I mean, what I think in terms of, I'm interested in what your thoughts about this in terms of, because this is an appeal for international action, is what I would consider a very striking divergence taking place between the two major Jewish populations on earth, which is Israel and the United States. Because in the United States, the attitudes are moving away from uncritical support for Israel. And polling earlier this year found 30% of American Jews thought Israel was committing genocide. And for those under the age of 45, it rose to 40%. So that is a dramatic divergence. I'm interested in your thoughts on that massive divergence, because in America, you've got some of the protests against what Israel is doing are led by younger Jewish Americans.
Yeah. This is again a very difficult question, which I'm not sure I can answer, and I'm not sure anyone can answer, actually, because I don't think it's just the Jewish lobby. I don't believe it is just. It's again something that's, and I don't even think, although it's more plausible, I don't even think that it is their arms industry. Of course, both elements are there, both the Jewish lobby and the arms industry, and they're pushing to continue the war and to stand by Israel, what's called our friend Israel. But I suppose Kamala Harris reads the polls, and she knows she's paying. She may lose the presidency because of this policy. So at this moment, I find it inexplicable, and I'm turning from the inexplicable to, again, like I said about the Israeli population, that's something that is so deeply ingrained. This defense of Israel, whatever it does. So there's something deep in the interests, the shared interests of the states and Israel.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose
they are imperialists, they are colonialists, they are capitalists, they are everything that those isms.
Yeah, I suppose what I was saying is actually in the United States, Jewish voters are actually more progressive there, but they've got better positions than Israel.
Yeah.
But and actually, it's why
they actually saw that here. I mean, here in London. I mean, when the same young generation, you've been covering this for years. were so supportive of Corbyn, and what happened? And I forgot to mention, in this respect, it's relevant, but I forgot to mention the role of the media here. So that's relevant both in the States, and especially here regarding Corbyn, but also in Israel. I don't know whether you know this, but the Israeli media doesn't cover anything of what's happening in Gaza. Anything, nothing. I mean, your regular person in Israel simply doesn't know. He could know because it could open some other media outlets. But if it just...
there's the internet. There's the internet, isn't there?
Yeah, but internet, you're exposed to whatever you wish to be exposed to. Yeah. But if you open the television and the main channels, not only the right-wing, lunatic channel, but the main substantial channels, they don't cover anything. And then there is this law outlawing Al Jazeera. They shut their offices down. So Al Jazeera is forbidden anyway. And you cannot, when you're in Israel, you really cannot watch that. I mean, you just have to have some ingenuity in how to overcome that. But if you don't want and you don't know how to do this, even this channel is blocked for you. How would they know?
I mean, it's a case study of dehumanization, isn't it? I mean, because in any society, the number of people who are sociopathic is very low. It's like 2%. What actually do you think this, if we look at all the atrocities in human history, they're often, and this is uncomfortable to accept, they're often perpetrated and supported by people who in other contexts are kind, generous, warm. They cry over sad things. They want to help people around them. But they stop thinking of certain people as human beings. And as soon as you get to that point, then you can support any level of violence and barbarity. I mean, that's what's happening, isn't it?
Yeah, well, this is something I actually wrote about at length in my philosophical capacity. So I can speak about that. What I'm thinking, and this is indeed a philosophical argument, I'm thinking that the whole way we're thinking about morality and politics is misguided. Because people, even on the left, they think that morality somehow is laid at the background or as a basis. And it's abstract and it's pure. And politics is something dirty that, comes after. Whereas I think it's the other way around. I think it's the left politics that are the basic. And then the morality and ethics just follow them and follow the history of leftist struggles. And this is how morality is shaped and should be shaped. But if you don't think in this way, then one can understand how the emptiness, the shallowness, the poverty of ethics, as I called it, the poverty of ethics doesn't lead anywhere. I mean, you can do anything you wish with general principles or sympathy. Sympathy to whom, when, what's the context?
Just a couple of final things on this. I mean, what hope do you have partly of this working? I mean, if we look in Britain, for example, if you look at the polling, to be honest, public opinion is actually on side. I mean, the polling shows 70% of the population think Israel has committed war crimes. The vast majority support a total arms embargo, and 55%, according to YouGov, support the arrest of Benjamin Netanyahu for war crimes and crimes against humanity. And yet the government, I mean, we could say, look, I mean, they've done, they've restored funding to UNRWA. They stopped the vexatious case against the International Criminal Court's case. And they stopped 8% of arms sales and then apologized for it. But it's still, we're nowhere near imposing sanctions. I mean, I just cannot imagine this government doing that. So what do you think, how much do you think this letter could help galvanize and shift that?
Our idea was, and this is why we translated it to many languages, that it will somehow drive people in several states to push, to do our work. And some of that is our own work. I mean, I wish I'd find a way to go and speak to people, influencing policy. Maybe David Lammy, I don't know, maybe who would be ready to meet me, but maybe Stammer, who I don't know, but maybe something can be moved. I mean, not sitting back and not doing anything because we are impotent is not a good idea. So we're trying. And I don't know, maybe in some other places. I just spoke this morning with the radio in Ireland, and maybe Ireland is more open to such sanctions, and then England will follow through. So, or maybe Norway, which is another. I'm talking about states which already expressed some sympathy, more than a vocal commiserations. So maybe this will be the procedure. We really don't know. So I'm not hopeful. I'm not hopeful at all. I mean, I actually lost my political imagination in during this last year. I was. But now I don't see any future. I don't know what will happen when this stops. But at least we have to stop that.
Well, on that, I mean, just so I don't end on a totally hopeless note. Obviously, I mean, it's interesting you mentioned Ireland, and Ireland has this position partly thanks to us. It's because they obviously have the experience of being occupied against their will and starved and suffering terrible horrors, which has engendered a certain empathy and solidarity. Just on that, though, I've interviewed Gideon Levy, the Israeli journalist, many times. He suggested hope would actually come from the United States, in that public opinion there is shifting, but he felt it was a pretty big time frame. He said 10 to 15 years. But do you think that's basically how this ends? It's the US hegemon, although will it remain the world's hegemon? Open question there. But nonetheless, it will be forced to shift its position. I mean, actually, it's interesting. The most pro-Israel part of America, of course, are white evangelical Christians, far more so than the Jewish population in the United States. Exactly. What do you think? I mean, do you think it's the US? Do you see that in the US that actually that?
Not really. No, I think I disagree with Gideon there. I hope. I mean, again, we should sow the seeds wherever, and then see what comes out of that. But I don't see this because, as I said, I mean, there's something in the American mentality that wouldn't go far enough from the Israeli policy, and we see this now. I mean, I don't believe that Biden really wanted this war to stop, because if he really wanted this war to stop, it would have stopped.
Yeah,
I mean, he could have done that. So it's not enough to. This is actually what was part of the thing that drove us to write this letter, because enough with these words, and we wrote exactly that in this petition. Enough with the words. Don't say you're sorry. Do something.
Well, very finally, because I do want some sort of hopeful note, and it's hard in the circumstances. How about this? Let's do this final angle. Accountability. It's so important with a crime of this scale and gravity that people cannot say, I did not know. And what your letter does is help put on the record that there were substantial numbers of people within Israel itself who knew what was going on. And they spoke out and they used their voices collectively in difficult circumstances. And they said, we know what is happening and action must be taken immediately. So then it can't be an excuse, whatever the failings of Israeli media, for others, particularly in power, to go, we didn't know what was going on. Do you think accountability, this letter helps?
Maybe it will. I think I would expect accountability to come, first of all, from Al Jazeera's report, because I suppose they had this investigative report about the war crimes committed by Israeli soldiers, according to their own testimonies. What they showed is a set of clips. Those soldiers, they filmed themselves happy, rejoicing when they demolished houses. So if this cannot account for accountability or draw accountability, I don't know what would. But perhaps this letter will help in this.
I think so. Look, it was morally, it's courageous. It's obviously the right thing to do. And, history will vindicate those such as yourself who did take a stand during a terrible, terrible crime. And we have to live in hope to believe that one day there will be accountability for this crime and those who spoke out.
I do hope so. Yeah.
Well, let's not give up on hope. It's important. It's important. Okay. There is always hope, and it's up to us.
Based on the record, yeah.
Yeah. No, it is incumbent upon us, however desperate things look.
Okay.
Well, so just for those listening, do share this video. Make sure you share the letter, get the letter out, press like, subscribe, leave your comments. Always love to hear your thoughts. But Anna, honestly, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
You're welcome.